Roll the clock back to about 7,500 years ago. The date historians and geologists agree on is roughly 5,600 BCE. Egypt does not exist yet. Stonehenge is 2,500 years away from being raised. The Sumerians are still centuries from inventing cuneiform. But in a wide, fertile basin sitting hundreds of feet below today's sea level, something extraordinary was already happening. At that time, the Black Sea was not the Black Sea. It was a freshwater lake, smaller, calmer, ringed by rich alluvial soil left behind by the retreating Ice Age glaciers. Rivers flowed into it from the north, the Danube, the Dnieper, the Don, dumping nutrients into a valley that had become one of the most habitable regions on the entire planet. And people knew it. Neolithic farming communities, the same wave of agricultural pioneers who were spreading westward out of Anatolia, settled along the shorelines of this freshwater lake. They planted einkorn wheat and emmer. They domesticated goats and pigs. They built rectangular timber houses with wattle and daub walls. They fired pottery. They wove textiles. They traded obsidian tools that we can trace chemically back to specific volcanoes hundreds of kilometers away. This was a civilization. Not a city-state, not an empire, but a distributed network of villages, of family compounds, of established farms, occupying the shoreline of a lake that no longer exists on any map. But here is what nobody tells you. That lake was 150 meters lower than the Mediterranean, and there was only a thin ridge of land separating the two, a natural dam of soil and rock stretching across what is now the Bosporus Strait, right where Istanbul stands today. That dam was about to fail, and when it did, the world of these villagers ended in a single, catastrophic afternoon. If this is landing, save this video. You will want to come back to this one because what geologists reconstructed about that afternoon is the missing chapter of the human story. Before we get to the flood, we have to understand who these people actually were, because the deeper you dig, the stranger it gets. In 1993, an American geologist named William Ryan and his colleague Walter Pittman, both from Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, were doing routine sediment analysis in the Black Sea. They were looking for evidence of climate change. What they found instead was a mystery that would take them the next decade to unravel, and that would eventually make the front page of the New York Times. In the cores they pulled up, they discovered something impossible. There was a sharp, unmistakable line running through the sediment. Below that line, freshwater mollusk shells, the kind you would find in a lake. Above that line, saltwater mussels. And the transition between the two, the moment freshwater became saltwater, happened not gradually over centuries, but in what geologists call a catastrophic event horizon, almost overnight. Radiocarbon dating placed that moment at approximately 5,600 BCE. And in 1996, Ryan and Pittman published their hypothesis. They argued that at the end of the last ice age, as the polar caps melted, sea levels rose across the entire globe. The Mediterranean climbed higher and higher against that thin natural dam at the Bosporus. And then, at some point, the pressure won. The dam broke. Ryan calculated the water rushing through at 10 cubic miles a day, roughly 200 times the force of Niagara Falls. The roar would have been heard 300 kilometers away. The freshwater lake began rising by 6 inches per day every day for 2 years straight. The shoreline retreated inland at a pace of nearly a mile a day in some low-lying areas. For the farmers living on that shoreline, this was not a slow migration. This was an evacuation, a generation-defining trauma. Their homes were swallowed, their fields ruined, their livestock drowned. Entire villages, every wooden beam, every pot, every hearth were left exactly where they stood, and then buried beneath cold, dark, salty water. And then in 1998, Ryan and Pittman said something out loud that got them attacked in academic journals for years. They said, "This is the flood. This is the event that seeded the Gilgamesh epic. This is the memory behind the Genesis story. This is why every culture around the Black Sea carries a folk tale about the world drowning." The flood myth is not a myth. It is a Neolithic eyewitness account passed down through 200 generations. But a hypothesis is not proof. To prove it, someone had to find the villages themselves. And that is where an oceanographer named Robert Ballard walks into this story, the same man who found the wreck of the Titanic. In the summer of the year 2000, Robert Ballard launched an expedition off the northern coast of Turkey, near the city of Sinop. He had heard about the Ryan-Pittman hypothesis and he wanted to test it. He was hunting for the old shoreline, the one submerged 7,500 years ago. Ballard had one enormous advantage that most archaeologists do not. The Black Sea has a bizarre chemical property. Below a depth of about 150 meters, the water contains almost no dissolved oxygen. It is anoxic, and in an anoxic environment, wood does not rot. Bacteria that break down organic material cannot survive. In theory, Anything wooden that fell into the deep Black Sea 7,500 years ago should still be sitting there, largely intact. Using a remotely operated submersible called Argus, the same technology he had used to survey the Titanic, Ballard descended into the darkness. The team followed the contours of a paleo shoreline that computer modeling predicted should sit at about 300 to 500 feet down. And on August 6, 2000, they found it. At a depth of approximately 95 meters, the submersible's floodlights swept across a rectangular arrangement of collapsed wooden beams. There were cut timbers. There were shaped stones arranged in a line the way a foundation would be laid. There were ceramic fragments scattered nearby. This was not a shipwreck. Shipwrecks do not have square foundations. This was a building, a house, a dwelling from a civilization that vanished before writing was invented. The team called it Site 82, and it was not alone. Over the following weeks, they mapped multiple anomalies along the same submerged contour line, the exact ancient coastline the theory predicted. Now here is where the story gets uncomfortable for mainstream archaeology, because Ballard's discovery did something that almost never happens in this field. It confirmed a controversial hypothesis with physical evidence, and it opened a door that nobody wanted opened. If there were villages down there, real, permanent farming settlements, from 5,600 BCE, then human civilization is significantly older and significantly more distributed than the standard timeline allows. It means that some of the earliest agricultural communities in Europe did not slowly spread and evolve. They were wiped off the map in a single event, and their existence was erased from every history book for 7,500 years. Drop this in the comments. Do you think the ancient flood stories in your culture came from real events or from imagination? I want to hear where you were raised and what the story was, because in the second half of this video, we get to the piece of evidence that has still not been fully explained, and it is the one that convinced even the skeptics that something is really down there. Since Ballard's 2000 expedition, follow-up missions have added layer after layer to the picture. In 2007, a team from the University of Pennsylvania's Institute for Aegean Prehistory returned to Sinop. They pulled up worked flint tools. They pulled up polished stone axes. They pulled up ceramic fragments consistent with the Karanovo culture, a well-documented Neolithic tradition from the Balkans that we know existed on dry land during exactly the right era. Then in 2016, an ambitious project called the Black Sea Maritime Archaeology Project deployed some of the most advanced deep-sea imaging equipment ever built. Its stated purpose was to study ancient shipwrecks, and it found more than 60 of them, some perfectly preserved from the Byzantine and Ottoman periods, with masts still standing and ropes still coiled on the decks. But buried in the same survey data were the older signatures, the paleo shorelines, the rectangular anomalies. Submerged story, and this is the part that never gets talked about enough. The Black Sea contains, sealed in its anoxic depths, what may be the largest untouched archaeological site on Earth. An entire drowned Neolithic country, potentially thousands of square kilometers of former farmland, sitting there oxygen-free waiting. Now think about what that means. Every wooden beam, every reed basket, every leather sandal, every piece of clothing, every wooden musical instrument, every carved figurine, all the things that turn to dust in normal archaeological digs are potentially still down there, preserved by a chemical accident of geography. We have found essentially nothing yet. The 95-meter house that Ballard filmed represents perhaps 1,000% of what could still be recovered. And here is the last piece, the one nobody has fully explained. In some of the sonar surveys, researchers have identified structures that appear too large and too geometrically organized to be simple houses. Rectangular platforms, aligned stone arrangements. Some sit at even deeper levels, closer to 130 meters, meaning they may date back even further than 5,600 BCE. Before farming, before pottery. Deep into the era of hunter-gatherers who, according to every textbook, should not have been building anything permanent at all. Nobody has excavated them. Nobody has confidently dated them. They just sit there in the sonar returns, geometric shapes in the black water, waiting for someone to send a robot back with a bigger budget. What Ryan, Pittman, and Ballard opened up was not just a discovery. It was a rewrite. The flood was real. The story was passed down accurately for 7,500 years, generation by generation, until Sumerians finally wrote it into the Epic of Gilgamesh around 2100 BCE. The refugees from that flood almost certainly scattered, carrying their farming techniques, their pottery styles, their oral memories, into Mesopotamia, into the Balkans, into Central Europe. Some scholars now believe that the sudden appearance of advanced Neolithic culture in southeastern Europe around 5,500 BCE is directly connected to the Black Sea diaspora. which means the Black Sea flood may not just be a story. It may be the reason your civilization exists at all. CTA 12-0013-00. If forgotten history like this hits, the kind that mainstream textbooks skip over because it messes up the timeline, then subscribe and hit the bell icon. New hidden history every day on this channel. But that is only half the story, because the same anoxic water that preserved this village is now protecting something even stranger about 40 kilometers offshore, and I will get to it in an upcoming episode. Outro 13-00-15-00. For most of the last century, when someone brought up an ancient flood, the response was polite condescension. Myth, folklore, symbolism, a story humans tell to make sense of chaos, and then a geologist pulled up a sediment core, and then a submarine found a house at 95 meters, and then a hypothesis nobody wanted to take seriously became one of the most well-supported catastrophic event theories in modern archaeology. The lesson here is not really about a flood. It is about what happens to human memory, about the fact that stories told correctly can outlive stone, that an oral tradition whispered from a grandmother to a grandchild over 200 generations can preserve a truth so accurately that geologists 7,500 years later can date the exact year it happened. The people who lived on that shoreline had no writing, no monuments, no archives. All they had was voice. And their voice reached us anyway. Somewhere down there in cold, dark water off the Turkish coast, a wooden house is still standing on its foundation. The people who lived in it never told their own story, but they left it there in the shape of the beams, in the pattern of the stones, in the sediment above and below, and we are only now beginning to listen. This hit, my video on the 9,000-year-old sunken city off the coast of Dwarka, India, will make even more sense now, because the same story is repeating itself on the other side of the ancient world. 7,500 years ago, a wall of Mediterranean seawater burst through the Bosporus and drowned an entire Neolithic country. The villages, the farms, the wooden houses of the people who lived on that shoreline are still down there, preserved in the anoxic depths of the Black Sea. In the year 2000, oceanographer Robert Ballard, the same man who found the Titanic, filmed one of those houses sitting on the seafloor at 95 meters. And what he discovered may finally prove that the ancient flood myths of Gilgamesh, Noah, and Deucalion were not myths at all. They were eyewitness memories, passed down for 200 generations. This is the story of the Ryan Pittman hypothesis, Ballard's Sinop expedition, and the lost civilization that history forgot to write down. Timestamps: 0000, the impossible discovery 00, 45 the world before the flood 03, 00 a freshwater lake, a natural dam 06, 00 Ballard descends into the darkness 09, 00 the largest untouched archaeological site on Earth 12, 00 why this rewrites human history 13, 00 the memory that outlived stone, ancient history, lost civilization, Black Sea archaeology, underwater mystery.